Good morning. My name is Lucie with the Smithsonian Marine Ecosystems Exhibit, and we are very excited and proud to introduce our speaker today, who is Dr. Lucie Krimsky of University of Florida.
Thank you, Lisa, for having me. And thank you all for joining us this morning. My name is Lucie Krimsky. I am at the University of Florida, based here in Fort Pierce. I am an extension faculty, which means rather than being based in a classroom up in Gainesville, I actually work with local communities to relay science for local, regional, statewide science-based application of the research that's done at the university. My focus, I'm a regional water resources extension agent. So my region is all of Southeast Florida, basically from Brevard County, northern part of the Indian River Lagoon, all the way down through the Florida Keys. And I specialize in water quality and harmful algal blooms. So you might wonder why I'm talking to you today about seagrasses and seagrass monitoring if I'm a water harmful algal bloom person. And that's because really in the Indian River Lagoon, water quality, seagrasses are at the heart of water quality. They are sort of the canary in the coal mine. They are the indicator of water quality, and they are directly linked to the health of water quality in the Indian River Lagoon. And as we'll see, unfortunately, also harmful algal blooms in the Indian River Lagoon. So I am happy to have this be a bit conversational, so feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions. If you want more information, please do so. So the program that I'm going to be talking about today is what we're calling Eyes on Seagrass in the Indian River Lagoon. And I'm going to start off talking a little bit about the IRL, or the Indian River Lagoon. I'm sure many of you are aware and familiar, but this does provide a little bit of context for you. I'm going to talk a little bit about seagrass ecology, as well as the threats, and why ultimately we created the Eyes on Seagrass program, and then hopefully how you all can participate as citizen scientists in the Eyes on Seagrass program. So, overview of the Indian River Lagoon. Again, this is sort of just your introduction. The Indian River Lagoon has three distinct and connected estuaries. All the way in the north, we have along northern Brevard County and Volusia. We have Mosquito Lagoon, we have the Banana River Lagoon, south of that, and then the entire length of the Indian River Lagoon, which is also broken down into sections, so north, central, and south. Because it is so long, 156 miles, that those regions really do act independently of one another. And so when we're talking about seagrasses, ecology, water quality, we need to look at them as separate individual components rather than as one long ecosystem. Some characteristics of the Indian River Lagoon: despite its name, it is in fact not a river at all. It is a shallow lagoon, which means it has brackish water, so part fresh water, part salt water. And fresh water comes from lands and tributaries coming out of natural and artificial rivers that enter into the lagoon. And then there salt water mixing from 5 inlets. So we have the Constantine de Leon Inlet all the way up north, all the way down to the Jupiter Inlet in the south. So because of this, we have the salt water coming in from the inlets, we have the fresh water coming in from the rivers and its tributaries. We end up with this really mixed salt water, what we call a brackish estuary environment. And because of this, it is an estuary. It is shallow, hence the name being a lagoon. It runs parallel to shore, and unlike most other estuaries that have tides, in Florida, we primarily have 2 high tides and 2 low tides a day, and that's what influences circulation in the estuaries. The Indian River Lagoon, because of the parameters of the inlets, shallow, running parallel to shore, it's actually water is more driven by winds than it is actually by tides. And so weather conditions and wind conditions are really going to influence what's happening in the lagoon at any point in time. It also has an artificially large watershed. What that means is the water from land, so that fresh water from land that drains into the lagoon, has been expanded about 50% of what its natural historic size was because of land use, people moving into the area, people not wanting to be flooded when it rains, water management, stormwater management, agricultural management. We divert a lot of the water that is on land and make it run off faster into the estuary than it naturally would have otherwise. So what that means is that the lagoon, especially in that southern part, so St. Lucie, Martin County, the watershed, the amount of water that is draining off the land is artificially large, meaning we get a lot more water than what the system has sort of the capacity or the historical capacity to accommodate. Characteristics. It also has very long residence time. And what we mean by residence time is it's how long when water enters the system, be it fresh water or water from the inlet, it's how long it actually stays there. And for this, we mean this is the time it takes about half of that water to turn over. So if you can imagine if water is sitting there and gets stagnant, it can collect pollutants, it can, you want that influx of fresh and marine water to keep that water clear. Depending on where you are in the lagoon, the time it takes to turn over 50% of the water can be extraordinarily long. It can be almost half a year. And because of that, the Indian River Lagoon, especially the Banana River Lagoon, where it takes about 156 days to turn over that water, it really is at risk of contaminants. And it's harder to get clearer, cleaner water because of the fact that it's wind driven. We only have those pockets, those 5 inlets to get that natural mixing. So it's just hydrologically a challenge of the system that we have to deal with. It also straddles the subtropical and temperate zone. So if you recall, we have pockets of fresh water, especially near the coast. We have pockets of saltier saline water near the inlets, which means that we have some freshwater species that can live there, some saltwater species that can live there. We have those species that can do that mix, that brackish water environment. We also have a mixture of subtropical species in the southern portion of the lagoon and more temperate species. Because of that, historically, the Indian River Lagoon had extraordinary diversity for an estuary. It's been recorded that there's approximately 4,300 different species in the lagoon, and the Smithsonian is actually involved in doing species inventories, especially for some of those not often seen species. So we're actually learning about new species all the time, especially those that are like living in the sediments that you don't, it's not like a giant fish that swims by. You really have to go searching for them. And it has a suite of habitats. These are the healthy habitats that help support the wildlife and ecology. So we have those natural beaches, we have the seagrasses, which we're going to be focusing on today. Oyster reefs, open water is a habitat in and of itself. Mangroves, salt marshes, and then the spoil islands. So all of these help to support the diversity of organisms, plants, and animals that live within the lagoon. And collectively, this is sort of an older study now, but it was estimated that the total economic input from the space industry, from marine ecosystems, from jobs is about $7.6 billion that the entire Indian River Lagoon contributes to the region. So, a significant monetary and economic investment, and provides justification for why we would want to continue to conserve and restore and protect the lagoon, as well as the species and habitats that live within. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit now because this talk is focusing on seagrasses. Seagrass are a plant. Despite the name, they are more closely related to flowering plants than they are to like the sod on your yard. So think of it more like a lily than like your St. Augustine grass. But they are plants. They do require photosynthesis to grow, which means that they need sunlight. And being submerged underwater, only way to get sunlight is through clear water. You need good water clarity. They also have salinity requirements. So those species in the Indian River Lagoon tend to have an optimal salinity requirement of around 20 parts per thousand. They can go into fresher waters. They can go into saltier waters. They really like that mixed salt, freshwater, brackish water salinity. They have a restricted depth range, and again, that's related to being able to access sunlight as it filters through the water. Temperatures and sediments. And the sediments is really important because you can see that the seagrasses have rhizomes, which helps them spread, but they also have roots. Roots is what helps them essentially stay in place and gather those nutrients. So they get sunlight from the water, but the nutrients have to come from the sediments. Seagrasses aren't able to collect nutrients from the water column itself. Those nutrients need to be in the sediment. This is the global seagrass distribution. You can see that tends to be targeted in those more subtropical, tropical areas with higher areas of diversity near the zone. And these are Florida seagrasses. So we have what we call the low canopy height, meaning that they're really short, only a few centimeters tall. Stargrass, Calagrass, and Johnson seagrass. And then we have the taller canopy forming species. We have shoalgrass, manatee grass, which, like its name implies, is an ideal food for manatees. Turtle grass, also eaten by manatees as well as turtles. And then widgeon grass. Widgeon grass is one of those weird species. It tends to like fresh water more. So you'll see it more in those coastal areas that get a lot of that freshwater discharge. Oops. Okay.
Well, manatees eat all these different varieties.
They sure will. Manatees, especially now, will eat whatever they can get their mouths on, but they prefer the larger canopy forming species, the manatee grass and turtle grass. So those that have been highlighted in blue, although you can find most of them throughout the lagoon, these are the ones that you're really going to be able to find in the southern portion of the lagoon. So St. Lucie, Martin County, that southern Indian River Lagoon region.
I'm sorry, say all of these you would find in the southern part of the lagoon.
All of these are found throughout the entire 156-mile extent of the whole Indian River Lagoon. But some of them, because of differences, if you recall in the beginning, I said that there are differences in the regions of the lagoon. So you're going to find these in higher densities at different areas. And so these are the ones that you're most likely to see here in the southern portion of the lagoon. Stargrass, if you add that, stargrass is going to be more in the northern portion of the lagoon. We don't see that so much down in Martin County, but that's really what you're going to see in Mosquito Lagoon, Banana River Lagoon. And then we have this 8th species of seagrass, which we don't think it's been seen in the Indian River Lagoon yet. It is an invasive species. It was just, it is one of the shorter canopy species. It was recently reported in Miami, near one of the marinas in Miami. And so it is highly competitive. Because we are in a stressed system with seagrasses, we really want to be on the lookout of this seagrass because we don't want it to compete with our natural areas.
Manatees won't eat that.
I am sure they will eat it. I mean, we're seeing now because, especially when areas of seagrass decline, manatees are eating less optimal food for them. They're eating algae. You can even see, the large macroalgae. You can see they'll eat that. It's not a preferred diet. It's not necessarily the healthiest diet for them, but they'll eat it out of necessity, basically. We've even seen manatees come out of the water and eat mangrove leaves, sort of as an act of desperation. So they would eat it, we assume. It's not in the lagoon yet, and I don't know if there's evidence of manatees eating it in Miami. So, but I think we could assume it would eat it.
Where's it native to?
In the Pacific.
Oh,
And I don't know if they know how it came over. I'm not aware of that. So you can see that there's a lot of different seagrass biodiversity. And the small-bodied ones, those are the ones that short-lived, fast turnover. They're the ones that are going to you're going to see first. They're going to repopulate an area first because they're quicker growing. They tend to exploit that new space, but because they're smaller, they are low biomass. They're not going to provide that lush source of food or habitat or protection for the marine organisms as these canopy forming species, which is what ultimately we really want to achieve. So there's kind of what we call a succession, where you'll first get these lower canopy, and then under healthy conditions, optimal conditions, it will transition into these taller, slower growing, longer lived canopy forming species. So this ultimately, manatee grass and turtle grass is the ideal condition that we're looking for. And seagrasses are important for a variety of reasons. We already talked about the fact that they are sort of the indicator of the health of water in the system, but they provide habitat for other species to live. They're ecosystem engineers, which means that they, because of their root system, because of that rhizome system, they really can transform a barren landscape into something that is structurally beneficial. Because they are photosynthesizers, they take carbon out of the atmosphere and convert it into a food source. So it's a way of natural carbon sequestration. They reduce the nutrient load. They're plants, they need nutrients to grow. We take excess nutrients out of those sediments, use it for growth. Improve water quality because of that structure that they form with their rhizomes, with their roots, with the blades. They can actually trap sediments and prevent it from remaining within the water column. So it can actually help clear the water itself and trap pollutants and as well as sediments. They're really important for shoreline and sediment stabilization. They are sort of that first buffer in terms of storms, wind, wave energy. We often hear about mangroves and dunes as providing a major buffer for storms, winds, and waves, but it starts out in the open water, and seagrasses help with that as well. And then, of course, it's a food source for the manatees, for sea turtles, but also for numerous other organisms. Fish, crabs, and vertebrates. There are things that eat the seagrasses themselves, as well as the little organisms that grow on the blades of the seagrass. So the seagrasses themselves are sort of an ecosystem that provides a habitat and food source. Unfortunately, we've seen globally, not just in Florida, but globally, we've seen a significant decline in seagrasses. This is from 2009, and it was estimated that we lose about 7% of our seagrasses per year globally. So what you're looking at here is the circles are where studies have been done. The red area indicates that there has been a decline in the amount of seagrass. Yellow means no detectable change, and green means growth. So while we have seen some growth, overwhelmingly, we've seen more areas of decline than we have in seagrass growth. And so this is globally as well as within our own state, Florida.
You know what conditions, like in South Africa, there seems to be only an increase.
So I would take this map saying not that there is an increase of seagrass in South Africa, but that there is a drought of research in Africa. So there are just no studies in South Africa, along those regions to be able to contribute to know what those systems are doing. So it's not necessarily that they're doing well, it's that there's just a lack of information for those areas. And we see this for everything. We see this for harmful algal bloom monitoring, for coral reef monitoring, really in areas where the governments just don't have a lot of money to contribute. We just have there's a dearth of data. So focusing specifically on the Indian River Lagoon, and I know this is a complicated graph. This comes from the St. Johns River Water Management District. They are responsible for managing the seagrass monitoring in the majority of the northern Indian River Lagoon, and then they partner with the South Florida Water Management District, who's responsible for the southern part, and collectively they put together these seagrass monitoring. So they do seagrass monitoring in two ways. Every other year, they actually do aerial surveys where they would go out and fly over the lagoon, and they will take aerial snapshots to try and figure out what's the extent, the aerial extent, which is on the left-hand side in the green bars. So what is the overall coverage of seagrass across the entire lagoon? Then every year, twice a year, they actually get in the water at the same place every time and run a transect, and they will swim down that line and assess every 5 to 10 meters what is happening with the seagrass along those lines. And so what this does is this gives us two different assessments of the scope of seagrass. It gives us sort of this overall just aerial perspective, but then it gives us a really focused on the ground. This is what we're looking like in terms of density, in terms of species, in terms of coverage. And so, and that's that black line is the in the ground swimming surveys. So what you can see from both of those lines, whether it's the green bars or the black line, is that we saw from peak highs around 2009 and 2010, we've seen a precipitous decline. And that's not ideal. And according to the St. Johns River Water Management District, 56% of seagrasses have been lost in the entire Indian River Lagoon system since those peak highs in 2009. So why? What's going on? Well, we have a lot of sort of acute short-term impacts. We have, just improper boating activities, propeller scars for people running through shallow waters and essentially digging up patches of seagrass at that top level. We have, remember, we talked about that artificially large watershed, meaning we have more fresh water coming into the lagoon near the coast than we really can assimilate. And what was one of the requirements of seagrasses? Salinity, optimal salinity zones. So you get these huge pulses of fresh water coming into the lagoon at any time. You're essentially turning this system into a freshwater system. The seagrasses are no longer in their optimal zones. They become stressed. We have coastal development. So anytime you develop right along the coast, there are going to be the stressors associated with that. There's going to be the actual sedimentation. There's going to be changes in seagrass, the building of docks and marine infrastructure. There's going to be pollutants runoff from those lands. We have changes in sediment. So we talked about the importance of sediment as not only stability for the seagrasses, but also the source of nutrients for those seagrasses. And in portions of the northern lagoon, we've seen that transition from sandy or shelly sand bottom to what they call muck bottom. And that's just all of this yucky organic matter that's coming off the land, and it's completely covered the natural ideal sediment type. Herbivory. We talk about seagrass, manatees and sea turtles and fish and everything that eats the seagrasses. But when you have a limited amount of seagrass in the system, these organisms still need to eat. And so they're still continuing to put added pressure on the remaining seagrasses that they have. So even though that they belong there, that this is, you know, part of their, you know, what they require to survive, it is still a stress to the seagrasses that remain in the system. And then of course, people. You know, we have nearly 2 million people in the Indian River Lagoon region. With people, people eat. That requires food. Food requires the addition of nutrients on land. People also poop. That is nutrients. That has to go somewhere. And unfortunately, a lot of those added nutrients also through septic systems, through sanitary sewer overflows during times of storms, that is another source of nutrients. So these are all sort of, it's sort of a death by 1,000 cuts type of situation for the seagrasses, and every single one of these being a threat. We talked a lot about nutrients, and seagrasses can't get nutrients from the water column. They have to get their nutrients from the sediments, but what can get nutrients from the water column are algae. And when we have all of those excess nutrients coming from fertilizers, from septic systems, from sanitary sewer overflows, from the freshwater stormwater discharges, ultimately those algae are going to take advantage of it. And we first saw our major harmful algal bloom in the lagoon in 2011, and it was a green tide. This was in the northern Indian River Lagoon, and it was, you know, just completely clouded out the water. In the southern Indian River Lagoon, we get blue-green algae or cyanobacteria blooms occasionally associated with the Lagoon Chumie discharges. So these two are in the northern Indian River Lagoon. We also, since that initial green tide, which was that initial tipping of the system of like, oh, we're out of whack, we're no longer in a healthy stasis, we have too many nutrients, that something is going to take advantage of that. We've had persistent brown tides, and you can see that the water color here. What was the first requirement of seagrasses? Light. Exactly. You're not going to get any light penetrating through the water column when you have algae density so thick that it's turned the water a different color. And so the seagrasses, without that light, simply can't grow. It's part of their natural cycle, and they're going to die. And so these harmful algal blooms really, as a result of all of those systematic challenges in the lagoon, this is ultimately the result and cause for most of the major declines in seagrass. If you recall, we had the peak seagrass growth in 2009, 2010, and then that first major, what we call the super bloom, was 2011. And since then, we've seen that precipitous decline. So this is as a result of those aerial maps that the St. John River Water Management District does, and they are able to map that aerial extent. So that's back in 2009 when we've seen those peak coverage. 2021, you can see we've lost the majority in the northern Indian River Lagoon and the Banana River. However, in 2023, there's a glimmer of hope. We're seeing some seagrass come back, especially in the Mosquito Lagoon. I didn't have, my slide size wasn't big enough, so I couldn't show you the southern Indian River Lagoon, but we are seeing seagrass growth back in the southern Indian River Lagoon as well. Really, the only area that we're not seeing it is that central Indian River Lagoon portion. That's a large urban area. It tends to be, it's extraordinarily narrow. It has a low turnover time, or sorry, a high turnover time, so water stays in there for a very long time. So the pollutants, the contaminants really just tend to stay there. Those other areas, we are seeing areas of regrowth, which is very exciting. So why the recovery? Well, over the last handful of years, the state contributed nearly $500 million to restoration projects in the Indian River Lagoon, and that's the state. The counties themselves have also contributed tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to seagrass and water quality restoration projects. What do those look like? That looks like the top left corner, there's a stormwater treatment area. So it essentially collects that fresh water that's running off of the land before it enters the lagoon, and it goes through a treatment process so that when it enters the lagoon, it's cleaner, it's removed of those pollutants. We've got shoreline planting, so providing buffer zones along the shoreline to be able, again, to capture some of those sediments, capture some of those nutrients, providing that buffer from the shore's edge and what's coming off the land. Picture in the top right are images of baffle boxes. That's a stormwater management collection. If you look in your storm drain, like what comes off the road enters a storm drain. There's no treatment. Once it enters that storm drain on the side of the road, that is a highway to the lagoon. So these are opportunities to treat it and remove the large pollutants. So the garbage, the trash, the leaf litter, the large material before it enters the lagoon. We have septic to sewer conversion projects. So in high priority areas, those areas where we know nutrients from septic systems are large contributors to nutrients, especially those in the coastal areas. When available, there's been a huge push to connect those to central sewer. Just education, pump that tape. Make sure if you can't convert to, if septic to sewer conversion isn't available and you have a septic system, just standard maintenance, pump it out, make sure it's working properly, make sure it's functional. The picture in the middle row on the right, that's muck removal. In the northern area of the lagoon, especially in Brevard County, they're physically going out and vacuuming that muck, putting it on the land to dry and then landfilling it so that we can recover some of that natural sand shell sediment. Living shorelines, again, buffer zones, actual physical plantings of oysters and seagrasses to try and do a little bit of recovery. The middle bottom, agricultural best management practices, acknowledging that agricultural fertilizer use is also a source of nutrients, and having best management practices to try and reduce what's coming off of the land from agriculture, the state mandated program. And then locally, from the urban side in fertilizers, most of the municipalities and county governments across the entire lagoon have initiated fertilizer ordinances restricting the timing and application of fertilizer on urban landscapes. So your home yard at certain times of the year when it's more likely to run off into that stormwater and less likely to be used by your plants. So the IFAS Seagrass program. This brings us back to why are we here today? We're talking about the IFAS Seagrass program. IFAS Seagrass is a statewide program that was started by Florida Seagrass. It's a citizen science or participatory science program to monitor the health and status of Florida seagrass populations. And we use standardized methods. Traditionally, we get volunteers to go in the water and do those transect surveys to be able to determine what the density is, what's growing there. It started in Charlotte County, in Charlotte Harbor estuary, as a response to macroalgal growth. They were seeing a decline in seagrass, a growth of macroalgae, and they wanted to see what was happening with their seagrass populations. And they didn't have a robust statewide program, so they relied on citizen science to do this. It was used in Tampa Bay at the Piney Point as a rapid recovery. It was a program, a monitoring regime that existed. Volunteers already knew how to use it, and they just got in the water and said, okay, what's happening with the seagrasses as a result of Piney Point? It's used in the Panhandle to identify areas for restoration. So you don't want to restore seagrass in areas where aren't optimal for seagrass growth. If you're going through the effort to plant seagrass, you want to make sure that the conditions are ideal, that it's going to be able to support it. Seagrass restoration is extraordinarily challenging. Success is low in ideal situations. So you want to give yourself sort of that just leg up by knowing where are the best places for salinity, temperature, sediments, all of those things that we talked about. And so that's being used in the Panhandle region. And so FWC, who's a partner with many of these projects, approached Florida Sea Grant, the agents who are here in the Indian River Lagoon County, and they said, we want to bring eyes on seagrass to the lagoon. We have seagrass issues. There's such an opportunity for us. Can we do it? And we looked at this traditional approach and we talked with our agency partners, especially the St. Johns River Water Management District, Department of Environmental Protection, and they said, this is great. But if we are going to use this to make management decisions, you have to use our protocols. This isn't sufficient enough. And we were like, we can't ask volunteers to go out and do your protocols. I have to tell you, as someone who goes out twice a year to monitor, it is hard, it is long, it is challenging, and we simply cannot ask volunteers to go out and do that. But we also thought back and said, okay, well, what's the goal of bringing an Eyes on Seagrass program to the lagoon? We don't want to just throw volunteers out in the water for the sake of having volunteers. Really, what we wanted to do was go back and figure out, where is seagrass growing? We have a really strong monitoring program in the state, but if you recall, they are going to the same locations, every year, and so they are missing huge portions of the lagoon. We said, we want to know where that seagrass regrowth is happening, and also where is it not happening, because that means that there's probably a stressful situation there. And having static monitoring stations isn't going to give us that spatial scale that we really want. So we came up with the idea of an Eyes on Seagrass blitz, where essentially all we are asking for are eyeballs on the water. And this is an opportunity for anyone, anywhere in the lagoon, who's out on the water to report. I see seagrass here, or I don't see seagrass here. And that is enough. That data is sufficient enough to say, okay, this area used to have seagrass, it still doesn't. This is an area we need to concentrate on and focus on. Maybe there's something recovery-wise that we really need to be addressing here. Or we are seeing seagrass regrowth here. Something good is happening. Maybe there's a sea bake, maybe there's a restoration project that's working, maybe water quality has really improved. This is an area we need to keep an eye on because good things are happening here. So we did our first blitz in this past November. We put a huge call out. Unfortunately, the weather didn't collaborate with us. We had terrible water quality because we had really, really strong winds. And so, very hard to see seagrass. So we extended it. We did, push the call at the end of the month when we had better water clarity. We did get 54 data reports. Of those, we went through and we looked at the pictures and we were able to say, okay, 30 of those are valid, which means some of them we couldn't confirm. There was no picture for us to confirm that yes, seagrass. A lot of them were actually algae, not seagrass. So we did our quality check. We had 30 valid responses, and that map on the left, all those little red dots are the data reports. So this is what it looks like. Essentially, you go out, you use your phone, you take a picture, you submit it, and these are what reports across the entire lagoon look like. So northern Mosquito River, you can see that we have really lush, thick. This is mostly Haladuli there, and that's in that area where we had that major seagrass regrowth and resurgence. We were able to confirm that. In Indian River, it doesn't look pretty, but it's seagrass, and that is seagrass in an area that otherwise hadn't had seagrass in a couple of years. But what's perhaps most important is that area in the orange box on the map, those are multiple cases of seagrass reported that were validated by photo imagery where seagrass hasn't been captured on the aerial or monitoring surveys. So what this does is this tells St. John's River Water Management District, when they go out and do their aerial surveys, focus on this area. We need to see really what is happening here. Are we seeing significant seagrass growth, and is there anything we can do to support this? So, although it was, conditions weren't necessarily in our favor, the data that we did receive was quality enough and worthwhile enough that we decided we're doing this again. So we're doing it in May, where water is clearer, warmer, shallower, more enjoyable overall. So it's a fun experience. The entire month of May, no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing, you can be walking the beach, you can be on a boat, you can be paddleboarding, doesn't matter what activity you're doing, you can report seagrass, or just as important, no seagrass. So it doesn't really matter where you are or what you're doing, you can submit a report to us and just say, I don't see anything here, or yes, I see something. All you really need is the ability to take picture. So that QR code, which is also on these flyers, will link you directly to the data entry form. It is super simple and shouldn't take you more than 2 minutes. This is what the data entry form looks like, with your name, your email address, in case you have any questions. Oh no, next one wasn't, and then ultimately what it's going to ask you is to upload a picture so that we can confirm the seagrass sighting. It's going to ask you what the water depth was, what activity you were doing, whether you were walking or boating or paddleboarding or kayaking. And that's essentially it. Your phone allows us to geolocate where the picture was taken, and from those coordinates is how we map the data. So it's extraordinarily low effort for the volunteers, but it provides us with sufficient data to be able to determine areas of regrowth as well as not. So, if you don't want to take a flyer with you today, if you are interested in participating, this is just a volunteer interest form. You just enter it, put your name, email address, and we will, as it gets closer to May, we will remind you, just a friendly little email reminder, hey, the blitz is coming, don't forget to participate. If you want one of the Sea Grant agents in the area to come give a talk to your fishing club, to your paddle club, to your HOA, to your book club, we will do that. Because the only way that this is successful is if people actually report. And this is the list of Sea Grant extension agents along the entire Indian River Lagoon and their counties. I'm on the bottom there. So please feel free to email us, let us know. We have a whole stack of flyers that I think Lisa put out for us. And with that, we'll take any questions. Thank you so much for listening. Yeah.
So what's the closest thing you have now to a map of this area that you showed, like the Titusville, like the 2009 and 223? Do you have anything going on? Where's the seagrass? Where it used to be, and where is it now? I mean, I know a lot of places where it's not that it used to be.
Yeah, it's going to be very similar to that.
So you don't really have any. Is there any source that?
Yep, the St. John's River Water Management District and the South Florida Water Management District have maps as well. They're not quite, they don't look exactly like that, but they do have maps for the southern portion of the lagoon. And you'll see that there have definitely been declines. There's been a lot of issues with sedimentation here, changes to sediments, the freshwater outflows. But just like in 2023, we are seeing areas of regrowth as well. So.
Do you do replanting?
I don't specifically. There are other labs in Florida at UF who do, but there's also a huge effort across the entire Indian River Lagoon. It's a new sort of collaborative effort funded by the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Preserve to work together to create seagrass nurseries First you need the product, you need the actual seagrass itself to be able to go out and restore. So that's in Florida Oceanographic Society has one, Florida FAU Harbor Branch has one, the Brevard Zoo has a site, up north of Lucie County, Marine Resources Council has a site. Then I believe there's an want to say it's Sea and Shoreline, an actual it's a company, an LLC that does restoration. They also have a site. And so collectively, those 5 organizations are working together to figure out how can we grow seagrasses in a nursery? How can we make sure that we have diversity? You don't want to just go out and plant the same, one type of seagrass. You don't want a monoculture. And also, what are the best practices for restoration? Because we know that actual going out and planting seagrasses, the success rate is really low. So they're working together to best practices for seagrass restoration. But while I do monitor sites, I am not involved in that effort at all.
So, good presentation. So when you're taking the photo, you're just talking about using a smartphone and shooting from above water, right?
Absolutely.
So
Yep. You don't need to be in the water at all. It's just above.
So you clearly need the visibility to be able to see.
Unfortunately, what
whether
we
there's
have.
seagrass on the bottom.
The other, you actually feel like getting in the water, and we did have a couple volunteers who did this, where the clarity was really, really low. They got in the water, pulled out a plant, and then took a picture.
Okay.
So it was validation that yes, there is, hallelujah there, but we couldn't
Yeah.
see the
I'm
actual.
not really sure you want people pulling the seagrass.
I know.
Given we need everything.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we are really reliant on clear water, which is why we selected May as our month.
Plus it's warm. Yeah.
Exactly, warm, we tend to get clearer waters, it's prior to storm season, so less rain influence, turbidity.
Is that new seagrass necessarily a bad thing, or are you trying to get rid of it, or?
Oh, no, we want as much seagrass as we can get, and seagrass is good, that new seagrass is good, and we want to know where is it growing, so we can figure out what we can do to, obviously that means conditions are good. Conditions are supportive of seagrass growth, and so if we know that, then we can figure out what's working.
I think he means the invasive one.
Oh, I'm sorry, you mean the one that was found in Miami?
Yeah.
Honestly, it's a controversial topic right now. Anything invasive that's gonna outcompete a native is inherently bad. However, there is some folks that believe that anything is better than nothing. And so, doesn't matter what it is. If it's something.
If you were encouraging it or discouraging
We are
it, not doing it.
discouraging. We certainly don't want it to spread. I think right now, because it hasn't been found in the Indian River Lagoon yet, really we just want to know, is it here, will it get here, and then there will be a management plan by the state to decide what to do about it when or if that occurs. For example, there's a large algae that grows. It looks very much like some of those shorter canopy species. And we've been seeing that everywhere in certain parts of the lagoon. It's called Callirpa. It looks just like a little fronds of seagrass. And there is a big debate of, this is an algae, it doesn't function the same as seagrass. But it's there and it's lush and it's providing a food source and a habitat source. So is this really a bad thing? And there's some evidence to suggest that the Callirpa is coming in first in stressed areas and then it's turning over to seagrass in later seasons. So, if it's providing that stability and that structure for seagrass to come in and naturally recruit, then maybe it's not such a bad thing. But yeah, the invasive species, it's still a wait and see situation. Other questions?
Well, for areas like the central lagoon with a low turnover rate,
Yeah.
you have like
fantasy quick fix. That might not have, possible questions on the environment anyway. Like a man-made inlet or.
Stop developing in that area, no. There have been a lot of discussions, and especially near like some of the really large bridges of changing the bridge structure to allow more flow to come through. There's been discussions about creating artificial inlets. I mean, once you mess with, we've already messed with the system. Once you add another artificial inlet that we've created, I think there's always unforeseen circumstances, and so it just necessitates a lot of study and forethought before moving forward with anything like that. So there's ideas out there, but certainly, and there's research going on, some studies going on, but to my knowledge, no forward movement with it. Thank you all. I hope you grab a flyer on your way out. Love to see some data entries coming in May. Spend some time on the water. Thank you.
Thank you.